Episode 143. No, Christianity does not offer a better future. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, I'll be reviewing an episode of the Unbelievable podcast. It's an episode that features Stephen Law and Michael Jones in conversation. I'll mostly focus on the things that Michael Jones says because through his channel, Inspiring Philosophy, he says things about Christianity which are unbelievable, at least to the listener who is prepared to fact-check things, which sadly most Christians are not. So let me do that job for you, so we'll see how Christianity always was and is still unbelievable. You can find the original episode at link 1 in the show notes, and more information about Stephen Law and Michael Jones at links 2 and 3. The Unbelievable episode starts with Dr. Stephen Law describing the humanism that he promotes. We at Reason Press agree with these points, and this is the stance that we take with regards humanism.
So I suggest that humanists sign up to basically 7 things. The first is that they're typically atheists or agnostics. So they don't actually believe in God. They might sit on the fence or they might positively disbelieve. They typically believe that this is the only life that we have. There's no heaven, there's no hell. This is it. This is all you get. They tend to place particular emphasis on science and reason. That's not to say that they think that science can necessarily answer every question, but they think that we should apply reason and science as far as we are able to. Nothing should be sort of placed off limits. So obviously a humanist would have a problem with those Bible Belt church signs that say things like a free thinker is Satan's slave, that kind of thing. They're not going to sign up to that. They believe that we can lead significant and meaningful lives even if there isn't a God, and even if you don't sign up to any particular religion. They very often have strong moral convictions, and indeed they often campaign on a number of moral issues, making moral arguments. For example, concerning assisted dying, which is a big political hot potato at the moment, and faith schools. They will often argue about the existence of faith schools. Female circumcision. Is that morally acceptable? Can you make a moral argument against that? So they're very interested in those kind of issues, and they're often involved in those kind of debates. They particularly emphasise individual moral autonomy, by which I mean they think that individuals should ultimately think for themselves and take on the responsibility for making their own moral judgments rather than deferring to some external authority, be it your local Communist Party official or imam or rabbi or the Pope or whoever else it might happen to be, secular or religious. No, the onus is very much on you to think for yourself and take responsibility on yourself for making your own moral judgments. And then finally, and perhaps this is the most interesting thing that they focus on, they are political secularists. Okay, so you might say, the United States of America is quite a religious country, so not at all secular, you might say. However, it's much more secular than the UK in the sense that it's politically secular. They have strong separation of church and state in the United States of America, so it's politically a very secular system. And humanists are political secularists. They fight for separation of church and state. Those are the 7 kind of characteristics that I associate with humanism. Many of these are things that religious people will agree with very often. I mean, lots of religious people are political secularists, for example. Lots of religious people think that you ought to take on responsibility if you're making your own moral judgments rather than hand it over to some external authority. So there can be considerable overlap then between religious people and humanists, and often they can make common cause on certain campaigning issues, and they do. The topics on which they tend to be best known are, first of all, they're very much against state-funded faith schools, because that's not separation of church and state. The state should be neutral on religion. It shouldn't promote religion. It shouldn't promote atheism. It should simply be neutral on these kind of belief systems. The state should also protect your freedoms to express your views and to engage in acts of religious worship and promote your religious views, or alternatively, to criticise religious views and be really quite aggressively anti-religious views. It is your right. The state should protect your freedom to do all of these things. So the state has an important role, and it should be neutral. And unfortunately in the UK it's not terribly neutral. We have a huge number of state-funded religious schools, not humanist schools, only religious schools, right? That's a one-sided support, that's the promotion of religious belief, taxpayers' money going towards promoting religious belief, not humanist schools. Now, I think that there should be a level playing field. If you go to Europe, you find both kinds of school being state-funded, humanist schools and religious schools. You go to other places and you find neither are being funded. I just want a level playing field. No bishops in the House of Lords. We automatically put religious people in, because they're religious, into our parliament where they can vote on legislation, 26 of them. The only other country in the world that does that puts clerics in with voting rights in parliament is Iran. But we do it in the UK. Humanists are not very happy about that because that is a lack of neutrality as far as the state is concerned. They fight for no religious privilege, no special religious exemptions when it comes to human rights legislation. So, for example, there's human rights legislation that requires that people not discriminate against gay people. You're not allowed to turn gay people away from your hotel. You remember in the good old days, back in the 1950s, people used to put signs up in their hotel windows saying no gays, no blacks, no Jews and so on, no Irish. You can't do that anymore. And you certainly can't put up a sign saying no gays. However, there are people and there are religious organisations that think that religious people should be exempt. That legislation, religious people should be allowed to turn gay people away because it's against their religious beliefs and we should respect their religious beliefs. Humanists don't like that. They argue against that. And they're also of the view that if the religions are capable of and allowed to perform legal marriages, then humanists should be allowed to do that too. But they're not. It's a one-sided deal currently. And then also humanists provide an awful lot of celebrants for weddings and funerals, particularly funerals. So my dad died. He wasn't particularly religious. I'm not religious. We got a humanist celebrant rather than having a religious service. It would have felt really wrong to me, sort of, to have some religious person in there talking about God and heaven and the afterlife and so on, given that neither of us believed it. So I think it would be a rather insulting thing to do to him, frankly. So humanists make these alternative celebrants available. So that's basically what I mean by humanism.
Michael Jones then lays out the foundation for Christianity.
Christianity, of course, is the world's largest religion, probably the most influential over the past 2,000 years. It's the belief that Jesus Christ is the God-man who died for our sins, arose from the dead, and all are called to follow him and give their lives to him. Now, what's more relevant for this topic, though, are what are Christian societies? So this is important because it's often assumed that Christianity leads to theocracy, or something like you'd get in the Middle East with a lot of Islamic countries. And it's not really accurate, and we can sort of see that in the world.
Would it be bad for me to mention the Christians who want the government to outlaw same-sex marriage or abortion? We might technically not be a theocracy in the sense that the government is not explicitly Christian, but it is theocratic in the sense that Christians are trying to impose their religious ideals onto everybody else.
You can read people like Edward Grant in The Foundations of Modern Science, or Tom Holland in Dominion, Permanent Revolution by James Simpson.
Michael mentions 3 books here, but I'll focus on just the first one, which he called Foundations of Modern Science by Edward Grant. The full title is actually Foundations of Modern Science in the Middle Ages. See link at 5. It's published in 1996 and makes case that the roots of what we now know as modern science goes back to the Middle Ages. This is not controversial. And Michael makes the case that because Christians were doing this science, science should be viewed as Christian, ignoring of course the fact that Muslims also did science at the same time, as well as Christians who didn't subscribe to his version of Christianity. Not forgetting those in the Far East who were neither Muslim nor Christian, but also gave us elements of the science we know and love today. But the point Michael is trying to make here is that Christianity grounded secularism, the separation of church and state. Don't be fooled by this sneaky language. Christians like Michael only make this point because secularism has successfully defended itself from Christian theocracy in some countries. You only need to look at the history of the Catholic Church to see how Christianity has consistently tried to become a de facto government. Imagine for a second that theocracy dominated secularism and the governments of the West were all theocratic. Would the likes of Michael be arguing for separation of church and state? No, I do not think so. Michael is of that breed of Christian philosopher that argues that whatever the status quo is, it is because of Christianity's influence. How convenient.
Really, Christianity, over time throughout Europe, led to the idea of separation of church and state for a reason. It was very much interested in this idea that there were different powers. There's the earthly and the spiritual powers, and these really need to sort of work together, but they are distinct. And so that goes back to Jesus' saying, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, render unto God the things that are God's.
Christianity did not exist in the society in which Jesus lived. Christianity was not a thing yet. Jesus said what he said because the Romans were an occupying power, and they dictated what the citizens should do. The occupied states did not have autonomy. Does Michael think that Ukrainian citizens in Russian-occupied Crimea should render unto Putin? Does Michael think that Palestinians in the occupied West Bank should render unto Netanyahu? Does Michael celebrate the Muslims who overthrew the Roman occupation in the 7th century? Would he feel different if it had been Christians? Quoting Jesus saying to render unto Caesar is not an endorsement of secularism. It is bowing down to a superior military power, and as such, it does not support the argument he is trying to make.
So Christian societies generally started to form these secular cultures, these secular governments, and they were distinct from the religious.
When Constantine converted Christianity, it had a significant impact on Roman society. Christianity changes the society through its governance. The Byzantine Empire was officially Christian. See link at 6. Not forgetting John Calvin's Christian Republic and the Puritans who tried to make a Christian Commonwealth. The very same pilgrims who complained they were being persecuted in England because they were prevented from creating a theocracy here. Christians like Michael only claim Christians created secularism because when Christians tried to create a theocracy, they failed. This really is a sour grapes version of, if you can't beat them, join them.
You'd have a strong separation of church and state in that regards, because Christianity is not in the business of forcing people to convert, although that has happened in the past.
There is a fuck bucket load, I could say at this point, even if Michael did at least acknowledge that Christianity has forced conversions. There is plenty more to come, so let's let this one rest for now.
We would argue, along with like the monk Alcuin in the Carolinginian era, that's not what Christianity is supposed to be doing.
Why didn't you mention Augustine of Hippo, Michael? You have spoken positively of Augustine, and yet in reference to the Donatist controversy, he endorsed forced conversion, even citing the New Testament. See the link at 7.
Christian societies produce basically what we see for the most part in the modern West, these Western cultures that have secular kind of governments.
You mean the Christians that voted for Donald Trump and Boris Johnson? That kind of secularism?
With religious influence often, and
would that include attempts to remove access to pregnancy services, marriages to same-sex couples and gender reassignment to those who need it? How are these anything but religion imposing itself onto society? Michael?
This is going to give us a more positive future.
Looking forward to the justification of that one.
Really, Christian societies need Christian worldview to thrive, and if we move away from that Christian worldview, things are not going to go as well as we had hoped.
For whom, Michael? Fundy Christians will certainly thrive in a society that forces obedience to a specific type. Those that exist outside of that ideal will not thrive. Secularism provides the ability for the different to exist with equity.
But as it started to happen with the invention of the printing press, the Reformation, missionaries starting to go out more.
Do not get me started on missionaries.
We start to see a Christian culture develop. And you read books like Christian Human Rights by Samuel Moyn. He'll argue that a lot of things we take for granted, like human rights.
I wish this lie would fucking die. What we now know of as human rights today is not exclusively Christian. It involved an ecumenical group of people, each adding from their own culture. This obscene idea that it's a Christian win is bad beard washing. Just stop it! Ugh.
Abolition.
Some Christians fought for abolition. Many more Christians fought against it. Atheists fought for abolition too. Hurrah! That makes atheism true! Claiming abolition as a Christian win while ignoring the Christians who started it and the hundreds of years during which Christians maintained it, and ignoring the reparations that were paid to those who lost their slaves. Did you know that it took over 180 years for the British government to repay the loans that it took to pay the slavers who lost out to abolition? When you see all of the facts, it is not a Christian win. But Christians like Michael and Justin Briley will trot out the word abolition as though it is a magic spell to fix everything, when in actual fact it is a cheap fragrance that fails to cover the stench of hypocrisy and duplicity.
Even a lot of ideas we see in science, like scientific methodology, came out of this Christian worldview.
I love it when a Christian says this, because then I get to ask them what scientific methodology they use to confirm that the Christian God exists. And then I watch them squirm. I'm still waiting for an answer. What's your answer, Michael?
We tend to think, everyone just believes, all humans should be equal. Ancient pagans didn't think that at all. I mean, it's very much, this comes out of the Christian worldview.
Really? Christians think women are equal to men? That same-sex attracted people are equal to cisgender people? Really? Do you really want to say that? Do you really want to defend that in today's society? Go on, Michael. Dare you.
A lot of the stuff that we cherish in the West comes out of the Christian society, and eventually it led to the modern West as we know it. And the fear I have is if we move away from that, it's going to start to lead to some deleterious effects.
How terrible that poor people will have the same voting access as others, that women will get full and safe pregnancy care, that children will be protected from paedo-predators, that vaccine misinformation will be punished, that LGBTQ plus people will have marriage access and appropriate health access and the freedom to be in public doing their jobs without being judged by bigoted Christians. That's the world I want, and Christianity will not provide it. When the host asks Dr. Law his take on the effect of Christianity on society, he appropriately gives a softer and less assured response.
I mean, I'm not a historian. There are people who argue that a great deal of what was good came out of Christianity. Other people say, no, not nearly as much. It's all being horribly exaggerated by the Christians. It all depends on who you read. I don't doubt for a minute that there are, there clearly, Wilberforce, and we can tell a story about slavery and so on. Clearly, a great deal of good did come out of Christianity, but at the same time that people were arguing for these good things, using Christianity as a resource, far more Christians were actually opposed to these reforms, and they were using Christianity as a resource, or what they believed to be it, biblical texts and so on.
This is the point I make. Christians like Michael, who use their platform to shout about the good things that some Christians did, while ignoring the harm done by so many more, are guilty of presenting a sanitized version of Christianity that does not match reality. It is dishonest and should be called out.
So whichever side won, it would have been the Christians, or the self-styled Christians, that won, that Christianity would have got the credit, because that was just the air we breathe. If you look at things like women's rights, gay rights, I'm not sure that really was driven particularly by Christians. I think Christians were more or less dragged kicking and screaming along behind the progress that was being made by essentially non-religious people there.
Stephen is right, and he is being far too nice about it. It's a disturbing demonstration of Christian privilege that they get to claim a win on the basis of rights for minorities, when it is Christians who have fought these rights all along. They only support minority rights because they have to. These do not exist because of Christian influence, they exist despite it.
Whether it's true is a more important question. If we can't get atheists or secularists or humanists to believe in Christianity, at least understand how important it is for society and why we need it. So
we don't need it. Humanism is better.
I don't think we're going to go to hell in a handbasket.
Great. Discussion over. Christianity is no benefit. Awesome. Go home, folks.
I think, though, what we do see is we do start to see some deleterious effects coming out of a secular worldview. To give two quick examples, one is I think one of the best things about the West is the amount of missionaries we've sent out.
Bullshit. Listen to the Life Unwasted podcast, link 9. Missionaries served only to replace indigenous cultures with Western fundamental Christianity and caused havoc and harm everywhere. This specific point deserves its own episode, which I will do in due course. Michael is flat out wrong, for multiple reasons, and he is too blinkered to see it. Worse than that, he is fucking hypocritical to even consider this a good point. Does he think that Mormonism is good because of the missionaries they send out? They're from the West too. Does he think Islam is good because of the missionaries they send out? Of course not. He only thinks missionary activity is good when it serves to indoctrinate and forcefully convert foreign cultures into his version of Christianity. In Michael's twisted worldview, secularism is deleterious to society because it actually lets other opinions, including religions, exist. The logical conclusion is that Michael thinks Christianity should not only dominate society, but eradicate all other ways of thinking. How Trumpian. How totalitarian.
Research by Robert Woodbury, for example, and he wrote a paper called The Protestant Roots of Liberal Democracy.
See link 10 for the paper being referred to, and link 11 for a critique of the paper. In short, Woodbury is an evangelical Christian who used colonialist data from 1820 to 1920 to support the idea that Christian missionaries were responsible for the rise of stable democracies, among other things. What is ignored by Michael is that this is an evangelical Christian using data created by Christians to report on how Christian missionaries changed foreign cultures to adhere to white Western Christian values. Success in this context is how well the foreign culture was changed to fit a desired result. The racist assumption is that these foreign cultures needed white Christians to come in and change their culture, because that foreign culture having existed for longer than Christianity was apparently a bad thing.
Well, there was a study done, National Context, Religiosity, and Charity, results from 53 countries, and the results were kind of startling. What they found was that church attendance was associated with more volunteering and giving.
See link 12 for a link to the study. Remember, Michael says this in the context of trying to show that secularism is deleterious to society. Christians volunteering more shows that how? It's not a surprise that a society where Christian churches actively seek volunteers to aid its outreach work report higher numbers of volunteers than atheists who do not have such churches. It's easier to report higher numbers of volunteers when you cajole your membership into working for free. This point simply shows how Christianity continually frames its oppression as a good thing. As an aside, this podcast is run entirely voluntarily. Andrew and I give of our time freely. If you feel like volunteering your time, please leave us a positive review on all podcast platforms that you can think of.
But they even say in the paper, if secularization is an ongoing process, we expect declining levels of charity and giving.
That would be because as countries become more secular, the population supports state-sponsored benefits, meaning that individual volunteering is less necessary. I would rather live in a society where my taxation goes to support those who need assistance and that volunteering is not required. That makes secularism superior to Christianity, which would rather keep the poor in their place, living off handouts.
A lot of what's good for building community cohesion, for creating strong community bonds, decreasing depression, these kinds of things, is really associated with a lot around charity work and volunteering.
Unsurprisingly, Michael is being disingenuous here and only telling part of the story. See the links at 13 for studies that show community involvement aids mental health. The key here is human interaction and a sense of belonging. Sure, volunteering does provide those things, but volunteering means that by definition there are people in a bad place that need help. A religion that needs to maintain a population of poor and impoverished people so that Michael can feel good about himself by helping them is a religion that is deleterious to society. this kind of volunteering maintains inequality. I suggest that a society that works to lift everyone out of poverty so that community members have equity and share in the same benefits is a better society than the Christian one Michael is proposing.
The biggest issue for secularism is fertility rates.
Oh dear, brace yourselves. This one's going to be painful.
A study done secularism and fertility worldwide found that secularism, even in small doses, leads to population stagnation and even decline.
See link at 14 for the study Michael referenced. Yes, secularism is associated with population decline, and this is a good thing. Religion is linked to families having too many offspring and driving continual population growth, and this is deleterious to the world as a whole, as well as to society. The fact that secularists and humanists recognise the problem of human overpopulation, see the link at 15, while Christians like Michael don't, is why secularism is better for society and religion is deleterious. This point by Michael is so fucking stupid, he may as well have grabbed a gun and shot himself in the foot.
If secularism got its way, or humanism got its way, and we all became atheists tomorrow, 2 more generations, and we just start to see population decline or stagnation. What happens when that? Well, we gotta bring in more people from religious countries.
No, because being overpopulated means you need the national population to reduce.
I mean, Eric Kaufman wrote a great book about a decade ago called "Shall the Religious Inherit the Earth?" And what he's saying is, yes, because they're the ones having all the children.
You can read a review of the book at link 16. It's no surprise that there are irresponsible Christian sects who can't stop having more children so that they can revel in creating more harm. Michael makes the same mistake that Eric does, that of ignoring the fact that the majority of secularist atheists come from these oppressive Christian families. Funding Christians who have more children are actually accelerating the change of their country into a more secular state through the numbers of future atheists they are creating. Beautiful.
If secularism got its way, which I don't think it will because of birth rates, but if they did, we're going to see population issues. We're going to see cultural collapse. What's going to happen? It's what Richard Dawkins was talking about, worrying about the Muslims coming in and taking over because they have a ton of children. So this is why he looks to Christianity as a bulwark. Christian societies historically do have a lot of children.
That's right. The answer to Muslims having lots of children and the fear of them coming to your country is for you to have more children. And this combined irresponsibility is somehow beneficial to society.
The reason why I want more Christianity is because I don't want to see gays thrown off rooftops.
How gracious. Michael doesn't want gays thrown off rooftops. He's referring to well-publicised acts of shitty violence performed by Muslims, and he's specifically pointing that out because, if you follow any of his social media activity, pitting Christianity as being less harmful than Islam is a pet hobby of his. On the subject of gays, here is a clip from a debate where Michael was asked the straightforward question, does he think homosexuality is a sin?
So you would say homosexuality is a sin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go to the next question.
Yes, Michael does think homosexuality is a sin, which means, like the aforementioned Muslims, Michael doesn't want gays to exist. He may not be in favour of eradicating gays through violence, be it from rooftops or from stoning, but that doesn't change the fact that he thinks a world without gays is a world with less sin. The methodology of how they are eradicated is a mere technicality.
I want to protect human rights.
Unless you're gay, because then you don't have any.
Secularism can't do that, can only do that for a few generations.
Yeah, Michael, this is one of your many statements that needs some backup because, frankly, it's complete and utter bullshit.
And then what happens? We bring in more Muslim immigrants, we start getting more Sharia ideas, and sure enough, we see a lot more hijabs in this room.
Wow. Just fucking wow.
And I want to preserve freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion.
Except if you're gay or Muslim, because then you're not allowed to exist.
Because I'm a Christian. Human rights came out of the Christian worldview.
Ugh, this is another topic that requires its own episode. Michael is not the only Christian who gives the impression that all of humanity was an uncivilized gang of mindless, feral scumbags who'd shit on their own mother for a baked potato. That is, until Christianity came along and suddenly society sprang out of nowhere like bluebells in a forest glade, and the sounds of birds singing was suddenly beautiful, and humans were magically convinced to start caring for one another. The biggest lie that Christianity preaches, that if society were to successfully eradicate it, we'd all turn into maniacal savages incapable of controlling our urges to rush and murder the first person we see. This level of misrepresentation is how cults operate. Ideas that form basic foundations of human rights go back to pre-Christian societies. The modern idea of human rights rose out of global conflict and was intentionally designed to be inclusive of all religions and none. It absolutely was not an exclusively Christian idea. Yes, it is true that there are Christians who have done some great things for humanity. Christians have also done a great deal of harm to humanity. Christians like Michael will emphasise the former, as though those things would never have happened had Christianity not existed, while ignoring the latter. This level of blinkered dishonesty is why I have zero respect for him and his brand of apologetics.
I mean, seems to be pretty much the consensus of historians. Like, read books like Christianity and Human Rights, an Introduction, Christian Human Rights, Dominion.
Of the three books that Michael mentioned, the first two are written by Christians who are legal experts, not historians, as he just claimed, and neither makes the case that human rights are exclusively Christian. In fact, they both affirm that human rights have a much more nuanced and complex story. The case they make regarding Christianity is that it influenced the modern interpretation. So Michael's argument is actually undermined by the very sources he brings. The third book he mentions, Dominion, is criticised for overly romanticising Christianity. I get the impression that Dominion was written for an audience rather than to be accurate.
Let's go back. Let's talk about the history. Go back to the ancient Greeks and the Romans, for example. A great book by O.M. Baki is called When Children Became People. I don't want ancient Greco-Roman morality, for sure, given how they treated children. The rampant infanticide, the children that were being used in all sorts of horrible places like prostitution. It's absolutely mind-boggling. You'll read that book and the hair on the back of your neck will stand up. And what he notes in the book is it was Christians that started giving value to children.
Again, Michael is being selective in his reporting. What he calls rampant infanticide is the practice of leaving newborns exposed in a recognised public place, to either die or be collected by someone else. Typically, this will be because of poverty or deformity. Sometimes those collected babies would be used as slaves. Aristotle, the philosophical hero of today's Christians, supported the practice. Take time to think for a minute. In a world where contraception is rare and only for the rich, and female health is basic, what do we really think is going to happen when there is an undesired pregnancy? Let's not be naive here. The ancient world was brutal, and I certainly do not want to regress to that. To Michael's point on Christian objection, it certainly does appear that Christians were the loudest opponents to this practice. But they were not the only opponents. For balance, see the PDF at link 18, which gives a perspective that Christian treatment of children wasn't really all that great either. An example given is the reinforcement of patriarchal structures. So again, what Michael has done is pick a single, crude and barbaric example where Christians were less bad, throwing gays off roofs, remember? And ignores the cases where Christianity propagated harm.
You talked earlier about women's rights. I mean, Tom Holland talks about this in Dominion. It starts in the Middle Ages because women have inherent rights. Used to be that women were basically the property of the closest patriarch, their father, their grandfather. And the church said, well, no. I mean, Paul said there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor free, or male nor female, free nor slave. We are all one in Christ.
I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man. You forgot that one.
Women have rights. They can choose who they want to marry. And the church started to push romance.
Christian tradition demands the man ask the woman's father if he can marry her. the Christian marriage ceremony, asks who it is that gives a woman away to be married. Christians didn't do away with dowry payments. Yet again, Michael is being extremely selective in what he reports, and he does it with no self-awareness or sense of irony.
You know where the idea of witnesses comes from in marriage? That's a medieval invention.
The PDF at link 19 details the practice of witnesses at weddings in ancient Rome to ensure it was consensual and legal. Michael is flat out wrong here.
Clifford Bauckham in the Worlds of Medieval Europe talks about women getting a lot more rights that starts to come out of this European Christian tradition.
So hundreds of years after Christ, hundreds of years after Christianity got its leg up, hundreds of years. And then Christianity decided to do this. Maybe this is a cultural progression and Christianity just piggybacking it for glory. Because if Christianity created it, why didn't it happen immediately? They waited hundreds of years, shithead.
There's a political scientist, social scientist named John Compton. He wrote a great book called The End of Empathy. He's coming out with another book called Untethered Believers. He's really interested in untethered believers because he's finding in actual research that untethered believers, the unaffiliated, are voting higher on things like authoritarianism.
See the links at 20 for the first book Michael mentions. The full title is The End of Empathy, Why White Protestants Stopped Loving Their Neighbours. Notice how Michael didn't say it in full. The book is a criticism of white Protestants and how they stopped supporting civic justice as they became more evangelical. There is also a link to a lecture by John Compton where he lays out the scope of his second book Michael mentioned, Untethered Believers, How American Churches Declined and Politics Took Over. In this context, untethered believers are those that self-define as religious but are not committed to a church. John Compton identifies this as the group most likely to be anti-democratic. This is bad news for Christians who want to use this data to criticise secularism. There are several concerns I have with the lecture that I've linked to and in what data is being presented. For example, when talking about support for political violence, John mentions that the poll was performed after the George Floyd murder. In that context, I don't see how the results can be considered unbiased. It seems that this poll needs to be repeated so as to get less emotive response from participants. On the subject of political violence, John Compton doesn't appear to differentiate between fighting to oppress and fighting for rights. The two are very different types of political violence. One is pro-democratic violence and the other is anti-democratic violence. Yet this distinction is not made in the lecture. So I have concerns.
Untethered believers are voting highest in terms of authoritarianism, followed by the unaffiliated, then atheism, and who's voting the lowest in authoritarianism is organized believers.
In his 2024 Sheridan Lectures, Compton stated, and I quote, "In recent years, hundreds of academic and popular articles and dozens of best-selling books have advanced the theory that a loosely connected set of beliefs or doctrines, collectively labelled Christian nationalism, is fueling a rise in authoritarian and intolerant attitudes among white Christians."
Organized believers are lowest in polarization and authoritarian ideas.
Michael has missed the point of John Compton's analysis here. Compton isn't saying that those going to church are less authoritarian. We all know there are some really shitty authoritarian churches out there. He's saying that regular church attendance acts as a moderating arm to certain political tendencies. Those without a community tend towards greater polarization and authoritarian leanings. This is an endorsement of being involved in a diverse community and a warning not to spend your days doom scrolling through racist social media content. It's not about being a regular churchgoer. As a side note, remember that this period in American history, it's the organised churches that hold political power. And this is the context for this part of the discussion. In 1950s America, blacks were more supportive of political violence than whites. Why? Because the blacks were fighting for the right to exist. If you separate the attitude from the political context, you miss the point. Similarly, blacks are still fighting for equity, and they have been joined by the LGBT community. It's not a surprise that in this context it's the privileged churches who are anti-political violence and the unaffiliated are pro-political violence. It feels like this data has been stripped of its essential context, which makes it meaningless.
Now, one final thing I want to say before I jump back to you is I'm not saying secularism leads to hell in a handbasket. I'm just saying Christianity gives us a brighter future. You can talk about good things with secularism, but what's going to give us the better future? It's clearly Christianity. It has a much better foundation, a much better overarching story, and much better way to motivate humans, as we see in the data on what missionaries have done around the world.
It's okay. Calm down. I'm not going to respond to this point. I've already made my points. I've already done the links, 7 and 8 or thereabouts. I think they are. Just bear in mind, I know he's lying. I know he's bullshitting. Let's move on.
Christianity is true. We would expect evil and suffering to exist. These are not problems for Christianity. They're expected.
Because the perfect and perfectly loving Christian God created the world to have evil in it because it was the best world he could possibly make. Yeah.
My question I always ask secularists is this: is what do you're a great philosopher. You're well known. You have a great purpose and meaning in life. What about the guy who checks out people at the grocery store, the guy who works in a factory, the garbage man? What are they deriving purpose and meaning from in a secular, humanistic world? Well, nothing.
You patronising piece of shit. A philosopher has meaning, but checkout persons and garbage collection persons have no meaning? Is this what counts as high quality thinking from a self-styled Christian philosopher? Holy fuck.
Basically, the average man has to resort to hedonism.
Straw man much, Michael? In Michael's perverted worldview, you can't have meaning unless his God bestows it upon you. But not only that, his God only bestows meaning where Michael approves of the meaning. No other meaning counts. This is why Christianity is a poison in the world.
Tell the poorest of the poor, the people that dig through trash in Africa, that they're just a collection of cells and they should try to contribute to human growth and development.
Well, Michael, these people are in that position because of the Christian missionaries you lauded earlier. Oh, the irony.
Or tell them the creator of the universe died for them so that they can be an immortal soul.
How does that help them now, Michael? Fucking hell.
That will reign with him for eternity, in turn come back in the resurrection to build this universe into something better.
That's right. The perfect and loving God of the universe has no care about what happens in your earthly life. Its only desire is for us all to serve it in glory at some point in the future, so long as we worship it now. This sounds more like an evil dictator than a loving God.
What do you think is going to create more positive change and growth and give more people meaning and purpose?
Practically helping people flourish now. That's what.
The story of Christianity does motivate people, and it has for thousands of years for a reason.
The thousands of people struggling with the concept of a loving God who does absolutely nothing for them and end up leaving Christianity disagree. And here the main show ends and moves on to the questions. I'll not be covering the questions section because it will inevitably result in repetitions of some of what I've already said. Suffice to say, I find Michael Jones to be disingenuous and hypocritical. He cherry-picks from Christianity and Christian history that which suits his argument, but ultimately only succeeds in gauging those who already believe. His adherence to ultimate meaning and the forceful spreading of Christianity throughout the world is jarring, and his criticism of Islam for things that Christianity is also guilty of reveals his blind spot. If this is what good Christian thinking looks like, it's no wonder Christianity is on the decline. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.